Hi everyone! We're live with Let's Talk Sex Tuesday. It's Tuesday, November 12th, which is the day before my birthday. It's my birthday tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I haven't thought about how I'm going to celebrate on the day of, but I have plans this weekend. They shall be fun. It is snowing, and that is materializing my plans. So, what are we here to talk about today? We are here to talk about talking about our sex life with our partners. So this is a stumbling block that many of us can hit, and there's a difference between talking about sex like in the moment, so communicating well in the middle of intimacy, or even leading up to intimacy. So communicating about our needs, our wants, our desires, about what's happening in the moment, versus exploring more theoretically the kind of bigger vision we have for what our sex life looks like and feels like, and how we want to create a sex life that works for both of us. So today we're going to be talking about that version, sort of the bigger picture version. There's lots of Let's Talk Sex Tuesday videos about sort of communicating with your partner in the moment, and you can check those out on my YouTube page, and a few of them will be migrating to my IGTV soon. So what does it mean to talk to your partner about sort of the bigger picture, and why should we do it? So I'm really coming at this from a place of ditching the comparison, ditching the shoulds, ditching all of the notions that we get from the media about how often we should be having sex, what positions we should be doing, why sex matters, all of these things, and just sort of tuning into our own version of our sexuality, our partner's own version of their sexuality, and how those two things mesh together or don't, or how we can support them to mesh together. So I am firmly a believer in us taking charge of our own sex lives, taking over our erotic autonomy, as Esther Perel would say it, and creating space for conscious, right, intentional crafting of your sex life. So just like a lot of other things in life, we can sort of just go with the flow and follow along with what we feel like we're supposed to be doing without ever stopping to reflect and intentionally think about what we actually want and what we actually want to create. So that's what I mean when I speak about sort of conscious intention into our sex lives. And I think it's a big reason why so many of us are dissatisfied with our sex lives, right? We have these outdated stories and these outdated notions that are guiding us. We have lots of shoulds and great expectations that are guiding us. And most of us have not stopped and asked ourselves a couple really key questions about our sex life, and then had a dialogue with our partner about that. So this is about consciously creating the sex life that you want, and creating space in your relationship to speak about these things. So what are some different tools that we can use to do this, to get conscious and intentional about our sex life? So one of my favorite things or places to start is definitely to don't start in the bedroom. Okay, you want to have a conversation when things are relaxed, when things are feeling good and positive. Ideally you're both fairly awake. Ideally the kids are off somewhere else, and maybe you're having a dinner together, maybe you're going on a walk together, maybe you're driving together. That notion of sitting side to side and not directly face to face during these conversations can be helpful when you're muddling through some things that are kind of awkward, right? So creating the right space to have this conversation is definitely helpful. Doing it when you're stressed and the baby's screaming is usually not the best time to be like, hey baby, what do you think about how often we're having sex? So creating positive space is definitely part of it. And the other way that I like to start is to not talk about our sex life specifically, to talk about sex more in theory, sex as sort of this separate thing or this entity. And the way you can start with that is to just start to get curious about this. So instead of talking about how frequently we're having sex or not having sex, or what moves we're using, or like those kinds of things. We can just talk about this notion of sex. Some really great questions to start with are around exploring each person's motivations around sex or connection to sex. So you can do that by asking a series of questions, which I'll suggest in a minute here. You could also do that by watching a video of mine together or looking at a TED Talk about sexuality and being like, hey, this is kind of interesting. You can watch it together, discuss it. You could choose a book that you could read together, right? So when you're reading sort of some theory and the latest research, you can start the conversation by being like, hey, I heard this thing. I heard this thing about the dual control model and about the fact that like part of our libido is genetically controlled and part of our libido is not. That seemed really interesting to me. This is what I thought about it, right? So then you're not even talking about your personal feelings or perspectives really. Sorry, you're not talking about like your perspectives on your own sex life. You're just talking about this theory that you read or this new science that you heard or this new tool that you read about, and you're sort of sharing your curiosity about it. And hopefully that's creating a space where your partner can join you in that curiosity instead of shutting you down in that curiosity. So the other thing you can do is start to get curious about each other's motivations for sex and connection to sex. So I love to ask people like how they learned, like their earliest memories of sex ed. So what do they remember being taught about sex ed? What do they remember their first impressions being? How did they learn about sex? If you're feeling comfortable, it can be neat to talk about each other's first times. So like, how did that go? Was it really positive? Was it not? You don't need to go into great detail about like those relationships or anything unless you feel comfortable doing that. But certainly talking about your first time and what associations you have with that can be really great. Sorry, I have a dry throat today. The other thing to explore would be to just say like, hey, what motivates you to have sex? Like, why have sex? Why is it important? That's a really big question, and somebody might be like, I don't know. Like they might need a minute to think about it. But it's an interesting question to ponder. Why have sex? Why does it matter to you? What is important about connecting sexually together? You know, why does sex matter in your relationship? And you could do this by like journaling or like reflecting on these questions independently and then coming together to share. Or you could just kind of like have a dialogue about those questions and be like, oh, this is what I'm thinking and that's what I'm thinking. So really questioning your motivations and your connection to sex is great. Also, depending on how long you've been together, you could start to reflect on, in particular, some of the things that really work for you. Like that's a great place to start, is the positives. So you could say, you know, like even for me, a highlight in my sexual relationship with my partner is when I was going to my Tantra coaching program and I was working really heavily with those tools and I was implementing them a lot and working on them with my partner. We had some very interesting and new sexual experiences. It brought us closer together. It made me feel more connected, and I was feeling sexual pleasure in a way that I haven't in a really long time. And, you know, we've had the baby, and so that's a little bit different. So I could start a conversation with my partner by saying, hey, remember when we were exploring this, or this was the time in our life and this was what was happening, or remember that particular night where we had sex and things were super great. I would love to bring some of that back. This is what was positive about it for me. This was my experience of it. What do you think about that? That's one interesting way to do it as well. The other thing you can do is, you know, sometimes you might want to bring up like something new that you want to explore. Maybe you're curious about kink or different fetishes, or maybe you're wanting to add a little spice and shift things up. One thing you can do is watch some movies that might have that kind of stuff in it. So like 50 Shades of Grey, or other films that are a bit more sexually explicit. And you can have a conversation about what is happening in the film. Oh, that's kind of interesting. I might be curious about doing that sometime. Or I don't know how I feel about that. Have you ever done that before? So again, bringing in this sort of like third-party external thing that you can comment on rather than being like, so anal, like, have you done it? Are you into it? So those are some of my tips for kind of bringing in external things, right? So talking about the science, talking about the research, talking about new things that you're exploring, talking about movies or different things that you've read about that you're curious about, and sort of exploring them theoretically and then slowly bringing them into the more real realm about things that you might explore. The other thing that I want to note here is that we're really talking about conversations that can make us feel vulnerable, right? We might suggest something that we want to explore, and we may feel very worried that our partner is going to reject us, shut us down, make us feel weird about it. So the other thing it can be helpful to do is to practice holding space or just creating safety first. And it doesn't have to be like a huge big thing. Definitely what you can do is say like, hey, I'd like to talk a little bit about our sex life, or have some thoughts on like sex. Can we create a judgment-free zone? Can we create a space where we can both explore and sort of think out loud and not feel like we have to totally censor ourselves, and trust and know that regardless of what is said, we're going to sort of connect afterwards and know that these are sort of theoretical explorations and they don't have to like mean anything or have any weight yet, right? That's a nice way to start as well. So just creating that idea of safety, of non-judgment, of like, I want to be able to explore. Normalizing the conversation is a huge piece of this, right? So I tell everybody all the time, like, yeah, I'm a sex coach. That doesn't mean I'm like polyamorous, into kink, like into all the like crazy things, right? What it means is I'm curious about how humans express their love and their sexual connection with a wide variety of people. I'm open to how other people do it. Some of it's for me, some of it's not for me. And I have no judgment about it. And that means that I'm creating and fostering an environment where my partner and I can feel safe to sort of say, hey, I'm interested in that, or I'm curious about that, or oh my God, no, thank you, right? So taking the leadership in your relationship to step into that, to step into, hey, I just want to hold a judgment-free zone. We can talk about things that we might be curious about or things that we've heard, and not feel judged and not feel shamed. The more we're kind of creating this beautiful space for intimacy and connection and for new opportunities to bubble up in our relationship, right? So the last thing that I want to share today is just around holding space. There's some awesome resources online about this. I think the lady's named Annie Lally, L-A-L-L-E. I'll see if I can find the link and post it. But if you YouTube holding space, you might find it. This relationship coach, they do a great demo video. But the idea of holding space is about not necessarily having a conversation in the way you would typically. So if you want to get a little bit more personal, if you want to kind of drill down and be like, okay, babe, this is what's happening for me. This is where I'm at. This is what's going on for me. This is what I'm looking for. And you want your partner to kind of share the same, then you might want to explore this notion of holding space. So the idea of holding space is that we're not having a dialogue back and forth. Basically, one person starts. You can set a timer or not. And it's their time to share what's going on for them. It's their time to get real and raw with themselves and to see what comes out. Who knows? It's the other person's time to create a container for that person to experience whatever emotions they want to experience. And my job as the listener is just to hold that container. I don't react with judgment. I don't react with affirmation. I don't react with defensiveness. I don't react with anything. This person is not talking about anything to do with me, even though it might look like it. They are just sharing their experiences, their perceptions, and what's going on for them. And it's my job to just hear and see and like be a witness to them sort of verbalizing what's going on in their brain. That's a great way of thinking about it. I'm just here to be a witness to what's coming out of you. I'm not here to like defend and respond and cajole. I'm just here to like witness. And then you can kind of see what comes out. Oh, wow, this is your motivation for sex. Tell me more about that. You can paraphrase back to them. So what I heard you say is, if I'm understanding properly, this is what you mean. You're telling me that you feel really pressured when I do XYZ. This is your experience of me doing XYZ. And your suggestion is, or your request is, that we do it XYZ way. Just sitting in that understanding, that connection, right? And then you could take a break and another time the other person could share, or you could stop, set the timer again and swap, and then it's the other person's turn. And again, there's no responding, there's no dialogue, there's no back and forth, you're just witnessing and holding space. Once it's all out on the table, then you can start to kind of discuss what's happening. You can look at, and trying to stay solution oriented, not focused on blaming, not focused on the personal, focused on like, this is my partner and their needs. So they're not saying that I'm doing things wrong. I'm doing them maybe differently than they would like. If she's saying she needs me to do a slow burn in the day, like if I want to get what I want out of this, if I want to get what I need to give her what she needs. So approaching this from a like, how can we each meet each other where the other's at so that we can both get what we want and need, right? Because ideally, for you to get satisfaction and full satisfaction, your partner should be getting satisfaction too. So there's a give and take here, right? There's a give and receive, give and take. And learning how to have constructive conversations about that, to hold space so that you can hear truly fully what the other person needs, and know that this is not about your skill, this is not about your prowess, this is not about anything. Listening to those clues, listening to those requests when you feel comfortable meeting them is a huge way to give her what she needs, to give him what he needs, for them to experience more pleasure, and for you both to experience more connection. So I hope that's clear today. The goal here is that if we want to be strong in our relationships, sexuality is part of that. There's definitely an art to speaking in the moment, giving feedback in the moment about what's going on. But we also want to take a bigger lens, a bigger view, and ask ourselves, what kind of relationship do we want to be in? What kind of sex life do we want to be in? How do we want to feel in that sex life? What do we want it to look like? What do we want it to be happening? And to start a dialogue about that is how we set the path for having the sex life that we want, right? There's multiple pieces included, but having a vision for what we want that to look like, and knowing that that vision might change. It ebbs and flows. How that vision might look very different in my early 20s than it does in my mid 30s with 2 kids. It might look very different in our 40s with grown-up kids versus in our 60s when we're after menopause, right? So visiting that vision often, visiting that dialogue often with our partners is how we constantly, intentionally, and consciously create and craft the sex life that we want, that's going to work for us, which is our goal. So, last but not least, before we close today, this week, I am promoting the Libido Lab. We're getting started next week. If you want more tools around this sexual communication piece, we are going to be covering that. The Libido Lab is like a 4-week, 30-day sprint for the end of 2020. If you have been thinking about how it's time to put some intention into your sex life, it's time to put some of your intention into your libido, it's time to think about the kind of sex life that you want to have and you want to create, that is what we're going to do. We're going to focus. We're going to hunker down for 30 days together, 15 women in this beautiful group coaching experience. I am there to support you. I am there to encourage you. We are going to be focusing on self-love and masturbation, which is like the number one key to getting the sex life that you want in the first 2 weeks. And then the second 2 weeks is about communication with your partner, starting to open up this dialogue, learning how to give that better feedback, and creating a positive feedback loop that's going to get you into new positive sexual experiences, especially if your sexual experiences are negative, painful, or just kind of like meh right now. So if you're interested in the Libido Lab, you have until Wednesday to get early bird pricing, $497 for this 4-week experience. I also have a bunch of early bird bonuses that will be going away on Friday, November 15th. You can DM me for more info. You can DM me if you want to hop on a libido rescue roadmap call. We'll talk for 30 minutes about what specifically is holding you back and what your next steps could be. Or you can head to the link in bio, get all the details about the Libido Lab. Email me, sophia@thehappyvaginaproject.com, and we can set you up. I'm so looking forward to seeing you all in the group. It's going to be an amazing experience to close out the end of the year, to head into 2020 refreshed, renewed, revitalized, like in yourself and in your relationship. Who doesn't want that? Have a fantastic day, my loves. I will catch you later.